So the topic that I was asked to talk about, a little unusual for me to talk about, but I'm going to be talking this evening strictly as if I was talking to yeshiva bachrim. In other words, everything I'm saying this evening applies equally to men and women, except for one specific question that I'm going to be asking. I'm going to be asking 4 questions. One of them is going to be specifically for the ladies. So let's begin at the beginning. Every morning I wake up and I start my day noticing the little things in my life that I tend to take for granted. It's called Birkas HaShachar. Last night in Maladafna, I spoke about morning brachos as an opportunity to start your day looking for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in little things. If you continue to do so throughout the day, then when tsaros happen, that was my message last night, when there's challenges in life, so your instincts is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu must be doing something good because he always does something good. So morning brachos is a focusing device. Morning brachos, we notice our eyes, we notice our clothing, we notice our shoes. And one of the things that we take notice of is that Baruch Hashem, we're zocheh to have clothing, we're zocheh to have options of clothing, and we make this incredible bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, malbish haromim. Baruch Hashem, I'm zocheh to be clothed. I get that bracha. Everyone gets that bracha. But there's 2 more brachos in our morning brachos that pertain to clothing. And I'm not referring to the one about shoes. I'm not referring to the bracha that is Ashehechin, She'asali Kol Sarki, which is the bracha for shoes. There's 2 more brachos that you say every single morning. And for those of you that grew up like me, since you were a child, you've been saying these 2 brachos every single morning that pertains to clothing. So, can this be interactive? Anybody want to suggest what they are? Okay, let's just pretend this is not Neshei Beitar, everyone really knows, but you're being modest. There we go. One is the bracha for wearing a belt. So, the Gemara at the end of bracha says, when you put your belt on, you make the bracha, Oza Yisrael Bigvura. When you put your hat on, you say the bracha, Oita Yisrael B'sifara. So I remember the first time I taught this in the seminary, the girls said, oh, that's so cool. The rabbis understand the need for accessories. But, of course, it cannot be that way, because secretly we know that not everybody wears a belt. And secretly we know that not everybody wears a hat. If you're married, so you have a covering. But it is possible that there are people here who are not wearing hats. It's possible that people are not wearing belts. Should you skip the bracha? Is that what you should do? Does it mean like Shem Yerachem, a blind person says Pekeach Ivrim? So a woman who's not wearing a belt says Oiz Yisrael B'Gvura? What exactly is happening over here? So the first question I want to give you, which could be the most practical take-home question of all, is that for the rest of your life, and you should live long and gesund, but for the rest of your life, you're going to be saying these 3 brachos every morning. What are you saying? You're saying a bracha. By the way, is the way to fix it that I don't sound like I'm speaking in front of 10,000 people? Anyone is a sound technician? I don't mind the echo. It makes me sound very important and powerful, but I imagine for the listeners, it could be a little annoying. Is this the way to do it? There we go. Is that better? Okay. I was about to tell you, and we will march forward. No. Okay, the point I want to make is my opening question. 3 morning brachos, especially the ladies in front of me who don't wear belts, who don't necessarily wear hats. What should you be thinking when you say those 2 brachos? So that is question number 1. Question number 2, this is the question where ladies in particular should listen, because I had this question for years and years and years and years and years. And when I saw the Avnei Nezer that I'm about to quote to you, the Avnei Nezer is quoted in the Shem Shmuel, it was like a game changer for me, because I teach. I'm a Gemara Rebbe, that's my main job, but I'm also a teacher in seminaries, and this question is very central to what it means to be a lady. It seems to be that women are stuck in a paradox. I'll show you in a moment that men have the same paradox in reverse, but women seem to be in a paradox. You were taught correctly that out of the two genders, women are more connected to the world of pnimius, the more internal. It's not just a biological thing. It goes back from the moment of our creation. The Gemara in the end of brachos tells us that man was created as one creature, both male and female, and that the female dimension was on the inside, the male dimension was on the outside, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the female from the inside and took it out and brought it to the outside, the male dimension, as a partner. This story so far, we asked our first question. Our first question is understanding why we need 3 brachos in the morning pertaining to clothing. The first one we understand, malbish harumim, but what's with the bracha for the belt and the bracha for the hat? The second question is what I call the paradox of women. What is the paradox? We are taught correctly that we are the creation that is pnimi, that is internal. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the first female, Chava, so she was created from the inside of what was then Adam. Adam was both male and female. And from then onwards, the role of the female is that the woman is the master of the pnimius of the world, and the man is the master of the chitzonius of the world. The first compliment that I know of, recorded in the Chumash, are the Malachim complimenting Avram Avinu, and the Malachim tell Avram Avinu, where is Sarah? Where is Sarah, your wife? Ba'olah, she is inside the tent. Rashi says, Kedei lechavev, to make Sarah beloved in Avram Avinu's eyes. Avram Avinu is the outside, running around, looking for guests, looking for orchim, and Sarah is inside the oihel. She is the koyach hapnimi, and Avram Avinu is the koyach hachitzoni. Let me try one more thing. Maybe if I step back. How about this? Is it a little bit better? Okay. Now I get all excited when I hear this major recording going on with all the reverberation. I feel like, I'm about to start some kind of a revolution over here. Beitar is historically its own city. Okay. Anyhow, so what does it mean that on the one hand, we know that women are pnimius. On the other hand, it is normal and healthy for women to be very busy about chitzonius, especially clothing. How do I know this? Because Chazal tell us that I have a mitzvah to buy for my wife this Pesach bigdei tzivayim, colorful clothing. So obviously Chazal would not tell us to do something if it was not appropriate. I happen to know that Gedolim's wives talk to each other about clothing, because I had a student. She was doing chesed by Rebbetzin Scheinberg. She was a girl. I don't know how she got this job. She was learning in a seminary called MMY, and she would go every Thursday night. It was just her and Rebbetzin Scheinberg and Rav Scheinberg, the 3 of them in one house. And she said it was incredible because Rav Scheinberg never ever wasted a second. She would come in, see him with his face into the Gemara. She would leave 2 hours later. His face was still in the Gemara. And one day there's a knock on the door. It's Rebbetzin Scheinberg's sister, Ruchama Shein, of All for the Boss fame. She comes in. She looks at Rebbetzin Scheinberg and she goes, Basi, I see you're wearing a new dress. So Rebbetzin Scheinberg goes, thank you, Ruchama. Yes, it is a new dress. And then she goes, Basi, you look very beautiful in your new dress. At that point then, Rav Scheinberg looks up and says, a beautiful dress for a beautiful woman. And my student caught that very, very private moment. And I found it, whenever I told it to my wife said, this is a beautiful thing for young ladies to know. what it means to compliment your wife. But she was complimenting his wife about her clothing, about her dress. And this is something that is normal. We always think that, maybe that it is a goyish thing to be obsessed with clothing. No. Women have an asik with clothing. And if you want, next time you go to a chasana, look at the men's side and look at the women's side. The men's side look exactly the way they do in the Mir Yeshiva. Looks like an army of penguins, awkwardly dancing. That's what's going on over there. Everyone, it's like, hundreds of Oreo cookies in a line. Black and white, black and white, black and white. On the ladies' side, it's filled with color. Everyone's wearing their different outfits. Everyone's saying what makes them look nice. So apparently this is normal. It's not just the Goyish world where you had, back in the day when the Goyish world actually wore clothing. So you had, the men still look like penguins, but the women look like peacocks. But by us, we just do it in a way that is more dignified and more royal. But the idea is the same. So let me say the question. The question I'm asking your gender, and if I was asking Yeshiva Bachrim, I would just switch the narrative. I'm asking you, why is it normal that you are the gender that is considered pnimius? You are the kol kvuda bas melech pnima, and at the same time, you're isik bechitzenius, and you're choosing your clothing and discussing your clothing, and it's a big deal. Anyone who's made a wedding? Just mentioning the word clothing, I put you into instant anxiety. It's the way it goes. So why is this considered normal? I mentioned, by the way, that with men it's the opposite, which I will not have time to explain. And men look very simple on the outside, but nevertheless, they have to be isik in chitzenius. How that works exactly in terms of them learning Gemara, and why is it in yeshivas that we're makpid, that when you learn Gemara, which is your access into the inner worlds of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dafka, you distract yourself from the chitzenius of your clothing, so that is a different discussion. I want to know how ladies who are the essence of pnimius, and nevertheless, they make a big essek of the chitzenius dafka of the world of levushim, in the world of clothing. I do want to mention to you right now, this is already showing you where I'm going with this class, is that there is an exception in the male gender, and that is the Kohen Gadol. We just read about him last week. The Kohen Gadol in Parshas Tetzaveh is the pnimius of the male gender. He goes into the Kodesh Kedoshim. He's the most hidden of everyone, and yet he wears 8 layers of clothing. So the same paradox that you find with women is the same paradox that you find with the Kohen Gadol himself. So that is question number 2. Question number 3 is, if I mention the Kohen Gadol, so the Kohen Gadol has his own parsha. It's called Tetzaveh. We just read it last week. Tetzaveh is just over 1/50th of the Torah. It's a whole parsha. Apparently, clothing is so important that it deserves a parsha and is completely male-centric. So there's something about levushim that we need to understand on a deeper level. And fourthly and finally, and this is the exciting part of the class, I want to share with you one of the dramatic moments in history that involves clothing. If we had a lot of time, I could show you how the story of Purim could be renamed the story of clothing. If it was done as a play, you'll notice that people are constantly changing their clothing. Unfortunately, you probably understand, as the British, we have our own twisted humor. And as a child, I always thought that the 2 funniest scenes, that must be the 2 funniest scenes in the Purim story, is number 1, Achashverosh wearing the begadim of the Kohen Gadol, and the second is is Mordechai HaTzadik wearing the clothing of Achashverosh. And I'll tell you why. Because in every single coloring book ever, Achashverosh is always a plus-side monarch. Think about it. He's always huge. And in every single coloring book ever, Mordechai is just like, like feeble, like one of those guys that you see in the mirror that you're worried that the wives don't feed them. And also, Think about it, right? The Kohen Gadol. Have you ever seen a picture of the Kohen Gadol? So they look with a long white beard. This is what they're supposed to look like. So now, look at the story through a twisted British humor. It doesn't make any sense. And first of all, Achashverosh could not have fit in to the Kohen Gadol's clothing. He must have looked ridiculous. But poor Mordechai, wearing those plus-size clothing of the king, no wonder he was in such a rush to go back to his sackcloth and ashes. But here you see, people are wearing each other's clothing. And we know there's a minhag Yisrael, a kosher minhag Yisrael, that we change our clothing, we change our hats on Purim, even today. It's a beautiful minhag, it's a fun minhag. These things are Kodesh Kodashim. The Baal Shem Tov, which I'm not going to talk about, discusses why Vashti, in the opening scene, must appear without clothing. Just to show you where he goes, he connects it to Adam and Chava Lifnei Achet. Because the Purim story ends, finally, at the final scene of the Purim story, is that we're metaken that chet. There's a lot of clothing changes going on. But there's one clothing change which is critical to the story, that is a fight between Mordechai and Esther. And I want to read it to you. Here we are, this is Perek Daled. Perek Daled is where the drama begins, where Haman takes a ring from Achashverosh and becomes the most powerful man in the world and decides that every single Jew on the 13th of Adar has to die. And all they have should be destroyed. At that moment then, how does Mordechai react? He puts on sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth is the clothing of tshuva. Sackcloth is the clothing of misa, of dead people. That's what he chooses. How does Esther respond? And I read to you from the psukim over here. This is the very beginning of Perek Daled. Vayikra Mordechai is begadav. He rends his garments. Vayilbash sak ve'efer. Pasuk Daled. Vatishlach begadim. Esther sends clothing. Lahalbish is Mordechai. V'lahasir sakami olav. Take off that sackcloth from my husband Mordechai. V'loi kibel. Mordechai's, no, I'm not changing my clothing. So, first of all, you should know that what Esther was sending him was not just regular clothing. As we're going to see in a moment, these were what's called royal clothing of Jews. This was called princely clothing of the leaders of Klal Yisrael. Man Malki Rabbanon. Who are the kings of the Jews? Our rabbis, our Jewish leaders. Now, unfortunately, they call me a Litvish yeshiva bach, even though my mother was German, my father was Hungarian. Doesn't make a difference. I am in a certain box. So a little bit, it hurts me to say that Litvish Rosh Yeshivas, all our Gedolim, you want to see Rav Moshe Hillel Hirsch, Rav Dov Landau, they wear like suits. This is what they walk around with. Not so interesting. He goes back. Rav Gershon Edelstein, Rav Aaron Stein, Rav Shach, you go all the way back. The Chazon Ish, they wear their suits. But Sephardic Gedolim, I am so jealous. Oh my gosh. I used to go Friday night in Harnof to daven with the Rav Ovadia Yosef for many reasons, but one of them is he looked like a melech. He had a turban, he had black and gold. You see a little bit by the Hasidic Rebbes as well, the Regina type Rebbes. They wore clothing that is fitting for royalty, for Malchus. Esther says to Mordechai, go and put on royal clothing of Jews. And he says, no, I'm wearing my sackcloth and ashes. What is going on? You read it at first glance, and you think, okay, this happens in my house all the time, right? My husband goes out, and you say, you're not wearing that. Okay, it's not, you're a Talmid Chacham, you can't wear that old tie, whatever it may be. But this is Esther, and this is Mordechai, and this is in the Navi, in Megillas Esther. There's something very deep going on, and as we're going to see in a moment, something incredible is going on as revealed by the Avnei Nezer. So now we have our 4 questions. Let's go over them one more time. I want a deeper understanding of the 3 brachos that we make every morning, Malbish Harumim, one for a belt and one for a hat. Second thing I want to understand is a deeper understanding of the paradox of women and clothing. The dafka, the gender that symbolizes that they are the pnimius of God's creation, they are Isaac in the chitzenius of begadim bedafka. The third question, why do we need a whole parsha with so much details about what the Kohen Gadol had to wear? Obviously, clothing is a big deal. And fourthly and finally, what is going on with Mordechai and Esther? What's this huge fight that the two of them are talking about? Sackcloth and ashes, princely clothing. What exactly is happening over here? So let's begin at the very beginning. What is the origin of wearing clothing? Once upon a time, Kadosh Baruch Hu created Adam, and that day's Adam and Chava was one unit, that our chitzenius and our pnimius were in perfect harmony. Lahavdil, like an animal. Animal does not wear clothing because the nefesh habahami of a cat that runs around your garbage here in Beitar is cats, and their chitzenius fur are in perfect sync. Humanity was created that way. Humanity was that our bodies was a little bit like we read on Shabbos, the face of Moshe Rabbeinu, that was in perfect harmony with his neshama. There was no need for clothing. Comes along the chait of Adam. At that point then, as the Gemara in Shabbos brings down, the Nachash placed a zuhama, this pollution inside our bodies. At that point then, our bodies became lowered, and that is why our bodies age, and that is why our bodies eventually have to be placed into the ground, not to be destroyed, but rather like a seed in the ground, to be able to re-blossom and to be cleansed of the sin of Adam and Chava, to remove that snake pollution. So when we come out, our true beauty, which we had at Har Sinai and we had in the Garden of Eden before the chait, so we can come back. The only reason why we die is exactly the only reason why we wear clothing. Because our bodies have been contaminated. And therefore the Hebrew word for clothing is levush. Look at the word levush carefully and you'll see two words, lo bosh, the removal of my shame. Lo bosh is the most basic need that we have, so that we should not look in the mirror and think of the sin of Adam and Chava and think of the lowliness of the human condition. That's not the way Hashem created us. By the way, the other word for clothing is begadim. The word begadim comes from the word begida, which means a traitor. In a sense, our bodies were a traitor to our neshama. But either way, we now understand the first bracha that we say in our morning brachos, something that we should not take lightly. Kadosh Baruch Hu, thank you for clothing. Sometimes you see pictures, Nebuch, people in Africa that wear rags, they can't afford normal clothing. Shem Yerachim, the busha that people go through. We have clothing, we have choices of clothing. So the first level of Hakaras HaTov every morning is don't forget to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the simplest of the simplest, that we don't have the busha of not having clothing. Lo bosh, we have a levush. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. That we had those levushim. It's Parshas Bereshis. Now let's move on to Parshas Tetzaveh. Suddenly we find a different dimension in clothing. What does the pasuk say? And I quote to you. And I quote to you somewhere in my notes. Excuse me. V'asisa, this is the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh. V'asisa bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha. Moshe Rabbeinu is told, make bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha for two reasons: l'kavod u'lesiferes, for honor and for splendor. For honor and for splendor. Two different things, two new dimensions in clothing. Clothing that give me kavod and clothing that give me splendor. Okay, instantly we now have a connection between those two brachos that we just spoke about, the belt and the hat. This is my own understanding. You don't have to be wearing clothing and a hat, but you do have to connect to the message of the belt and the message of the hat. Let's do this one by one. Why is it that those of you who have Hasidic husbands, they wear a gartel for davening? What's the meaning of a gartel? What's the meaning of a belt? The belt, in symbolism, reminds us that there's a higher part of the body and the lower part of the body. Everything above the belt is kedusha. There's a joke that they say, I don't know if you find this funny, but when I was a kid, I remember this joke. They say, by the Hasidim, the stomach is holy because, let's say, everything they do at a tish is that they mala the food. So they makbid to wear a gartel. By us literature, we wear a tie, because for us, from the neck up, everything is kadosh. And our cousins from Yishmael, they just put it right on top because it's all gashmias. Anyhow, it's probably sounded funnier in its original Yiddish, but the point is that that's it. From here up, it's kedusha. And the point of a belt is to remind ourselves that there are clothing that give us kavod. And that too you need to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for. That you're not just covered, you're not just wearing a towel. You're wearing something that gives you a sense of kavod. That you could appear in front of honorable people and you look mechubad. Connected that, you say, Oiz Yisrael Bigvura. But there's a third level called Tiferes that gives you splendor. Honestly, the simplest example would be a kala on her wedding day. A kala on her wedding day. She is wearing something she'll wear this one day in her life. On that one day, she's going to be walking down the aisle and the Rosh Hashivas will stand up for her. It's not a shtick. She has a din of malchus. Her husband's the melech, she's the malka. What they're building now is a microcosm of the Beis HaMikdash. So she wears something, and our custom is that she wears something special on her head to remind her that this moment she's tasting the begadim of Tiferes, the begadim of the Kohen Gadol, the begadim of Rav Yosef, or whoever is the Rav Rashid by the Sephardim, whoever the big Rebbes that wear clothing that give them splendor. They elevate them, that you look at them and you say, wow. Now, what is fascinating is that the Ramban and the Sefer HaChinuch both explain the need for a whole parsha that talks about clothing, and they both say different ideas. And I don't believe that they're disagreeing, they're just seeing things from different ways. The Ramban beautifully says, your clothing is how you make an impact on the world around you. Which, by the way, I say this to my students, I work in Kiruv. You can't say I'm dressing for myself, because it doesn't work. Instantly you're going to realize that you're talking to people through your clothing. As a matter of fact, I tell them, you yourself will judge people by their clothing. Late at night, you need to get directions. You can't see their faces, you just see what they're wearing. So that person that wears begadim of kavod, that's the person you're going to ask. Because you say, and he's an ish mechubad. You talk through your clothing. I remember seeing a study back in the day when I was much younger, a study, this was early 1980s, comparing IBM with, for those of you of my age group, you know what IBM is. Everyone else, look it up. IBM and Microsoft. These two companies were the two huge, big computer companies. And IBM had a rule that everyone had to wear uniform. And Microsoft had a rule that you could wear whatever you want. Wear something. It can be whatever you want. And they did. And they found out that IBM was much, much more creative, was much, much more well organized, and Microsoft was much, much more creative. So that fits in with the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch says that what you wear becomes you. It's not just what you do to the world around you, it's what you're doing for yourself. You become the clothing that you're wearing. And it constantly works that way. In the Goyish world, if you want to go to Manhattan and go to the top lawyer. So you first go into a building, and you see there's like some secretary that tells you which floor to go. And she doesn't care how she dresses. She's being paid minimum wage. She looks like the fashion today, like they freshly fought with wolves. And she's sitting there, you know what I mean? She could not care less how she looks. And she says to you, go to the 14th floor. So she gives you a message, you don't have to take me seriously. And she gives herself a message, I don't take myself seriously. You go to the 14th floor and you meet another secretary. She is the secretary for the lawyer. She's already dressed, mukhuberet. She dresses properly because she represents the top lawyer in the city. And she feels good about herself. She feels mukhubad. She feels she has an important job. And then you walk in to the lawyer and you found out that the lawyer is a she, and she is wearing clothing that screams at you, if you mess with me, I will eat your head off. This is what these power clothing that women wear to show, take me seriously. She walks around, I'm the king. I'm in charge. So clothing has an impact on yourself, says the Sefer Chinuch, and clothing has an impact on the world around you, says the Ramban. We're always talking through our clothing. I don't know if there's any single girls over here, but I work in Kiruv, and sometimes the girl says, what's the big deal if on my first day I dress casual? And I tell them, a Menachem Nissel made up statistic, that 90% of your future chassan's, the way he sees you, is the way you look during those first moments that he first saw you. So it's going to make a difference. It's the way we are. We judge people by the chitzenius. And the initial thing, before you even open your mouth, he's made a whole bunch of decisions about you. So you have to look your best. It's something, a very, very powerful idea. So that is Parshas Tetzaveh. Now comes the Avnei Nezer and says, okay, I want everyone to put their safety belts on because I'm going to take you a whole different dimension of understanding what clothing is done. If I stop the share now, you'll say, okay, Parshas Bereshis, Parshas Tetzaveh. Bereshis is the first of those three brachos. Tetzaveh is the second and the third. Kavod, Tiferes. Clothing is not just covering my shame. Clothing also impacts myself and impacts the world around me. Says the Avnei Nezer, we've just scratched the surface. There's a whole different layer of understanding what Levushim is all about. And here I want to quote to you his exact words. By the way, he talks about it in two places, in Parshas Tetzaveh and in Parshas Vayigash, on that whole discussion about Yosef giving clothing to Binyamin. He has a whole essay over there, and there's a lot of overlap. But the key words, he says, Ki kol dava pnimi tzar kisi v'lavosh. He comes along and says something incredible. He says, the etzem fact that you have layers of pnimius that demands what's called kisi v'lavosh. Now he explains what he means, and I'm going to give you my understanding. But my understanding is on two levels, and it's the second level that I think is the big chiddush. The first level is part of human nature. Something that is precious, you hide. So for example, my Rebbetzin has three types of jewelry. One type of jewelry is, let's say, she goes to Target, buys accessories for $25, she leaves them lying around. If the clean lady wants to steal it, no big deal. It doesn't mean anything to her. There's another, Baruch Hashem, we were just zocha to our 40th anniversary, and I sold one of the kids and bought her a piece of jewelry. And this was something that she, no, it's not serious, I did not. Okay, we get nervous over it. But for me, it was a big deal. I was siphoning off my little kollel checks, anyhow, the point is that already is precious for her. So it's hidden in the house. It's in a very special place where she keeps her expensive jewelry. All 5 pieces. And Well, Baruch Hashem, I've had a few big anniversaries. Now, the third category my wife does not have, because I'm in chinuch. But I was in a certain South American country. I'm not going to say where, because I don't like to label. It just happens to be the story I know. And I went to a wedding of a Talmud. And the Talmud's mother told me that we, meaning her chevra, they have pieces of jewelry that are, I don't even know if this number exists, but worth tens of thousands of dollars. She said a bigger number, but I can't even say it. It's just, I not to fess what she said. They keep it in a bank. She even told me that they make, I think, zirconian imitations of it, which they wear on Shabbos. But the real thing, they bring out for weddings. So this is beyond the comprehension of my gender completely, what she was talking about. But there's something incredible that comes out of it. If you're guarding something that's super precious, you guard it as much as you can. Now, men are the guardians of the Torah, the world of Talmud, which is not today's discussion. Women are the guardians of life itself, which you celebrate every morning when you say Shirasani Kirtzainai. And anything to do with the source of Chiyas. So something that is so precious has to be hidden. This is the first level of what it means, big day covered, v'tiferes, because things that, so to speak, distract people from things that is the source of life, that is the first level of understanding why the Avnei Nezer says it's something that has pnimius. So the more pnimius there is, the more it needs layers of covering. And I use this when I feel very uncomfortable talking about the topic. And I work in care of something I get questions like this. I'm forced to give an answer. And I always talk about that covering yourself is your way of showing that what I have is the most precious of the most precious, which connects to creation itself, the source of all creation. But that's not what the Avnei Nezer says. There's a further level of depth over here. And here he says the following. He says, the very fact that you are guardians of pnimius deserves kavod and tiferes, and that kavod and tiferes is expressed through levushim. The way I think about it is today, in modern day phones, the thing called Bluetooth. It connects two things. There's some kind of a magical connection between two things. No one knows how it works. It's magic. It's Bluetooth. But somehow or other, that is your begodim, says the Avnei Nezer, that give you kavod and tiferes. Are begodim that bring out in a way that you want to bring out, that's the kosher way of bringing out, the fact that there's layers of pnimius going on. If I understand it correctly, he's saying a totally different way of understanding what clothing is all about. Let's go step by step. Big Day Shabbos. Everyone here has Big Day Shabbos. Why do you wear Big Day Shabbos? To honor the Shabbos. Says the Avnei Nezer, that's not why you're wearing Big Day Shabbos. You're wearing Big Day Shabbos because you have to wear Big Day Shabbos because you have a new neshama. You just got a new level of pnimius. So that new level of pnimius demands a new level of levush. That's the side of Big Day Shabbos. Big Day Shabbos is Big Day covered. Big Day Yom Tov, which is a different form of pnimius, is tiferes, is that level. We spoke about the Kohen Gadol. Dafka, because the Kohen Gadol has so much pnimius, he goes lifnei v'lifnim, he needs 8 layers of kedusha, 8 layers of chitzenius and begodim, 8 layers of kavod and tiferes. The regular Kohen, he only goes into the Kodesh, he only gets 4. He doesn't get the second set of 4. And finally, you get to the ladies. So Dafka, because they have more pnimius, that they're oisek in this hidden world of life itself, where all the bracha is found, and the bracha has to be hidden. Dafka, because of that, they give honor to that pnimius through their begodim, that have kavod and tiferes to it. So it's not by chance. It's be'etzim to be that way. It's dafka and yom tov that we give our wives bigadim tzivainim, because we have to sort of celebrate that their layers of pnimius need those begadim. Now, I don't know what they teach in the seminaries, and it doesn't interest me how you pull off that it's covered in tiferes and it's done exactly the way a Yiddish woman is supposed to do it. That's the chachma of women. But I do understand that but dafka should be that you get into it and you talk about it, because this is how you show the walls that you have these layers of pnimius. And finally, we can go back to Mordechai and Esther, and it comes out to this incredible, incredible concept what's going on. Let me read to you what's going on. In Perek Ches, you have the final end of the story between Mordechai and Esther. I'm jumping. Let's go back to Perek Dalet. What happened in Perek Dalet? In Perek Dalet, you have the big fight. Mordechai and Esther. Mordechai rushes to his sackcloth and ashes. Esther says, no, I'm sending you the clothing of Rav Yosef. I want you to walk around Shushan. Everyone looks at you, they see a Jewish king. What's the pshat over here? Esther was pleading with Mordechai, what went wrong with our nation? Where do we mess up? What do we do wrong over here? And the answer is we assimilate into the Persian Empire. Look how they're dressed. Everyone's wearing Persian fashions, and they're following Persian sports and listening to the Persian music stations. It's the Hamish crowd. Look how they look like. There's no difference between them and the guy next door. We need to recreate Jewish pride, says Esther. Esther's a genius because she understands the oimek of what the problem was and how to fix it. Mordechai says to Esther, I agree with you 100%, but not yet. Klal Yisrael are not ready for that. That's level 2. Level number 1 is tshuva. Sackcloth, and everyone has to realize that they're as good as dead. Do you remember how the story goes? And for some reason, a lot of people get mixed up. What day in the Jewish calendar did this conversation happen? Anyone know? Thank you. Yud Gimel Nisan. 70 days later was the turnaround. 70 days later, the Jews were given the second letters, the right of self-defense. We're not learning today the Megillah, but it was a psychological letter. It means instead of every Jew having his own personal Nazi / Amalekite saying, on the 13th of Adar, I'm going to kill you. So now the Yid turns to the Nazi and says, I don't think so. I think I'm going to be killing you now. So the whole thing flipped around. At that moment, when the second set of letters were given over, look what it says in the Psukim, Perek Ches Pasuk Tetzaveh. He gets the letters, Mordechai yatsa melifnei hamelech bilvush malchus. He wasn't wearing Achashverosh's clothing. He was wearing the clothing that Esther wanted him to wear. Tcheles, Chor, Ater Zav, G'dayla, Tachrich Butz, V'argamon. The royal blue, the royal white, the crown of gold, the fine linen, and the purple. This was the 23rd of Sivan. What happens next? Vayishushan tzahal v'samecha, la yudim, ha'isa eira v'simcha, v'sasan, v'yaka. That happened then. By the way, you can ask your Shiva Bacha son, what day in the Jewish calendar does those words, la yehudim ha'isa eira v'simcha, v'sasan, v'yaka, they're all going to tell you it happened on Purim. No, it happened on the 23rd of Sivan. It's a little random fact that people just don't pick up on. But it's right there in the narrative. But the point is, he wears 5 clothings, comes along the Avnei Nezer, the Heilige Avnei Nezer, and says these 5 clothing correspond exactly to the 5 levels of Mordechai's neshama. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. Every person has 5 levels of their neshama. Then he connects it, Chassidish, beautiful, to the 5 begadim that Binyamin received from Yosef. But the point is, it suddenly gives us a whole new understanding of what's going on. Mordechai was bringing out the oimek of what a Yid is, and it came out in the glory of his clothing. So let me summarize what I came to say over here. Number 1, something practical that you can start tomorrow morning. I'm not asking you, I'm begging you to look at your morning brachos through a different light. Your morning brachos is preparing you for a day of seeing Hashem in everything, in every small little thing in your life. So when times are hard, so then you always know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there all the time because He's always been there all the time. But there's going to be 2 brachos over there, besides the bracha of Malbish Harumim, that reminds you of something that is unique and special for your gender. That you have begonim that give you covered, and you have begonim that give you tiferes. And finally, this message is something, this time of the year, of 2 Adars, and we're coming up to this Megillah that is filled with clothing changes. What should be the clothing? How should we paskin when Klal Yisrael is at war? What should we do when every day you read the newspapers and you see Rahman al-Islam, the Yiddish boys are dying, fighting for us? What should be our reaction in the world of clothing? The world of clothing is important. And I believe we have no sackcloth anymore. It's not our system. The sackcloth should be in your hearts. The sackcloth should be something that you recognize that in your lave, that be'etzem, every day is a miracle. My Rebbe Rameir Shapiro spoke in the last years of his life again and again about how Klal Yisrael, I don't want to say it, I can't even say what he said privately to us because it was very scary. It was very scary what he said. It's ki'ilu nothing's going wrong. It's ki'ilu that he knew that these days were coming. And I'm telling you now, in your heart we have to be b'tshuva. In our heart we have to say every day of being alive is a miracle. But b'chitzonius, we have to focus on what it means, the beauty and the dignity of Jewish men and Jewish women. The Jewish men with what we wear, the clothing of a yeshiva man, you wear the pride that we walk around like B'nai Torah, and the fact that the ladies wear what makes them exalted. And they all know, the secular world knows, about the covet and tiferes of the way that the women walk around. It's not for me to talk about these things. But I think it's an act of fighting on behalf of Klal Yisrael, of Jewish pride, that we stand for something special. And all that's left is that the second half of that pasuk that I mentioned, that Mordechai wears these 5 layers of clothing to bring out the layers of his pnimius, the Jewish malchus, that we should all be zeicha, that this Purim, enough tzaras and enough pain, that we should all be zeicha la Yehudim, ha'yisa'ir b'simcha v'sasam b'yakah. Thank you for listening.